Hello, my name is Dr. Stephen Critchlow. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I've also been a church pastor, and I'm doing a series of talks on the topic of depression. And I'm winding this series up by looking at 4 characters who really struggled with very low mood and great difficulties in their lives. I'm looking first of all at their emotional state, and then I'm looking really at trying to work out what caused it, and then I'm also looking to what happened. How did they resolve their difficulties and their problems? And today I want to look briefly at the character Elijah. Now, Elijah was one of the famous Old Testament prophets. In fact, he was the prophet who appeared with Jesus on the mountain of Transfiguration. And yet he went through some very, very difficult times. Here is what he says, and this is from 1 Kings 19. He says, "It's enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers." So Elijah was obviously here in a very, very low state. He was out in the desert, collapsed under a tree, and he's saying, "Lord, take away my life." He must have been very low and very down. And can we work out what had brought Elijah to that very low state? Well, let me just give you a little bit of the background. At this time, Israel was being ruled by a very wicked king whose name was Ahab. And his wife was Jezebel, who come from beyond the borders of Israel. And she was even worse. And so wickedness was rife in the land. And also at this time, the heavens were shut up and there was no rain for 3.5 years. And the place was barren and there was famine in the land. And that was the situation in which Elijah went through his greatest test, if you like. What he did, Elijah, at the word of God, called together all Israel to the mountain of Carmel, which is in the north of Israel. You can go there today. And on Mount Carmel, he had this contest. And this contest was between all the false prophets and the true God. And the false prophets, they built an altar and they danced around it all day and they cut themselves, calling on the name of their gods that God would answer by fire and come and burn up the sacrifice on the altar. And of course, nothing happened. And then Elijah built the altar to the true and living God. He called on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob just once. And the fire of God fell and consumed the altar sacrifice and all the water that was on the altar as well. It was all consumed. And then Elijah dealt with all those false prophets. And that must have been a tremendously difficult experience, but also exhilarating because he could see the hand of God working in power. And then Elijah went to the top of the mountain and called on God because now wickedness had been dealt with in the land. Would God now answer by not only the fire, but also giving rain? And he went out there and he sent his servant 7 times to look, is there any rain coming? And finally on the 7th time, the servant saw a cloud like a little man's hand, and he said, the rain is coming. And then Elijah exerts himself and runs in front of King Ahab's chariot 17 miles all the way down to a place called Jezreel. And then Queen Jezebel says, "Elijah, I'm going to get you. In 24 hours, you're going to be dead meat." And Elijah runs for his life out into the desert and there collapses under this tree. And he says, "Lord, let me die." But you see, God is a very gracious God. He doesn't condemn Elijah. Instead, he provides Elijah with food and water and sleep. And Elijah sleeps and eats and drinks and then feels refreshed. And then he goes to a place called Mount Horeb where he meets God in a new way. And in the still small voice, Elijah hears what God is saying. And in that still small voice, Elijah knows that God is still with him. And God speaks to Elijah and sets him on his way again and recommissions him and gives him lots of things to do. You see, that's the kind of God we serve, a God who cares for our physical needs. You see, Elijah was totally exhausted. And sometimes people can be exhausted through lack of sleep and lack of energy. And sometimes other physical things can come in. For example, depression can follow illnesses such as hepatitis, influenza, thyroid problems, etc. There can be a physical cause underlying it. And with Elijah, it was that exhaustion. And as Elijah struggles with that, he meets God in a new way. And God helps him and strengthens him and blesses him in his life. Thank you.